So let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about the wild, evolving relationship between us, our human creativity, and artificial intelligence. Is AI coming for artists' jobs, or could it actually be the most powerful creative tool we've ever gotten our hands on? Let's figure it out.
All right, let's just get it out there. This is the big question, right? The fear that's kind of lingering in the back of everyone's mind. You see AI spitting out these incredible images and songs from just a few words, and you have to wonder, are human artists about to become obsolete? Well, is that what's really going on? To get to the truth, we first have to understand the machine itself.
To really get what's happening, we've got to pop the hood. The tech that's powering this whole creative explosion, it actually has a name that describes it perfectly: generative adversarial networks.
Okay, so what in the world is that? Well, at its core, again, is basically a system where you have two AIs that are locked in this intense, high-stakes competition. You've got one, the generator, that's trying to create new original stuff. And then you have the discriminator, whose only job is to figure out if that stuff is real or if it's a fake.
The absolute best way to picture this is to think of it like an epic battle. The generator? It's a brilliant art forger trying its best to paint a perfect fake Rembrandt. And the discriminator? It's the world's greatest art critic who's been trained on thousands and thousands of real Rembrandts. Now at first, the forger is just awful, and the critic spots the fakes in a second. But every single time it fails, the forger gets feedback and gets a little bit better. Now imagine that cycle repeating millions of times, until the forger gets so incredibly good that the critic can't tell the difference anymore. That's the moment you get that mind-blowing AI-generated art.
Okay, so now we know how it works. But that still doesn't answer our big question. Is this super skilled forger here to replace the original artist? Well, it turns out the research into how creative pros are actually using these tools, it tells a totally different story.
And this diagram? It shows the new dynamic perfectly. The core creative process, the inspiration, the creation, the reflection, that all stays completely human-led. The AI isn't hijacking the cycle, it's being plugged into it. So where a designer used to have maybe one idea, an AI can now spit out dozens of variations on that same idea in seconds. It just massively expands the creative playground for the human to explore. Now, that all sounds great in theory, but what does the data say? A huge review of dozens of studies looked at this very thing, how designers are really interacting with these new AI systems. And the findings? Well, they might surprise you.
First, just look at how they're controlling the AI. It's pretty overwhelming. Designers much prefer hands-on, familiar interfaces. Sketch-based interaction is the clear winner. So this isn't about just typing a sentence and crossing your fingers. We're talking about artists using their core skills to guide the AI from a very real, tangible starting point.
And what are they actually asking the AI to do? Well, the most common thing, by a huge margin, is beautification. Now, what that means is the designer gives a rough initial input, like a quick sketch, and the AI helps to flesh it out, to refine it, to turn it into a more polished, fully realized image. So here's the bottom line. The data points to a really clear trend of collaboration. Designers are using AI like a superpowered paintbrush to amplify their own vision. But for any creation to really be successful, it needs an audience. And that brings us to the whole other side of this puzzle, the consumer. Even if a creator is using AI as a tool, there's still this huge psychological hurdle on the other side. When we look at art, or buy fashion, or appreciate design, we're not just buying a thing. We're buying a story, a connection to the person who made it. And that's where AI runs into a very, very human problem.
This is the exact question that researchers from the Journal of Retailing and Consumer Services wanted to answer. They ran a bunch of experiments to see how people really felt about fashion that was designed by an AI versus fashion designed by a human. And the results were crystal clear. People consistently and pretty strongly prefer the human-designed stuff. The driving force behind that choice came down to one powerful word: authenticity. We value the effort, the story, the human touch that we believe is baked into something that was created. A shirt designed only by an algorithm, it just doesn't hit the same.
So now we've got a bit of a paradox, right? Creatives are embracing AI as a co-pilot, but consumers are kind of skeptical of things made only by AI. The solution, it turns out, is to make that collaboration visible. That same study found a way to close this authenticity gap. It turns out, when they told consumers that a human designer had customized or given input on an AI-generated design, that negative bias just vanished.
So the key wasn't to hide the AI, but to actually highlight the human partnership.
And get this isn't just some dusty academic theory. One of the biggest fashion brands in Europe, Mango, is putting this exact idea into practice as we speak. This quote from Mango's tech chief brings us right back to a word we heard before, co-pilot. You see, they don't see AI as a replacement for their design teams at all, but as a tool to amplify what their people can already do.
Just look at their workflow for a recent campaign. It starts with a human team shooting photos of the real clothes. That human work then becomes the training data for the AI. The AI generates the campaign images, sure, but it absolutely does not get the final say. A human art team comes right back in to curate, to select, and to give that final creative stamp of approval.
And there it is. That's the perfect synthesis. This isn't human versus machine. This is human creativity guiding machine capability. The human is the director, the curator, the final judge of what looks good. And the AI? It's the infinitely fast, unbelievably talented assistant.
So, let's circle all the way back to that big, scary question we started with. Is AI the end of human creativity? The evidence seems to be pointing to a pretty clear no. In fact, it might be the beginning of a totally new kind of creativity, a future where our innate human spark isn't replaced, but multiplied. So the real question we should be asking isn't what AI can create by itself, but what we can create together.